Welcome to CIS 579 Technology of E-Business. This is Chapter 12, E-Commerce Strategy, Globalization, and SMEs. After reading this chapter, you should be able to describe the strategic planning process. You should be able to describe the purpose and content of a business plan and a business case. You should be able to understand how e-commerce impacts the strategic planning process. You'll understand how to formulate, justify, and prioritize e-commerce applications. You'll be able to describe strategy, implementation, and assessment, including the use of metrics. You'll be able to evaluate the issues involved in global e-commerce. And lastly, you'll be able to analyze the impact of e-commerce on small and medium-sized businesses. This chapter focuses largely on strategy, specifically as it relates to e-commerce and how do we use e-commerce to create competitive advantage for our organization. But before we can jump into all that, we really need to define what we mean when we say strategy. Most people kind of have a general idea of what they think it means, but we really need to have a more formal definition. So one that the book provides is a broad-based formula for how a business is going to accomplish its mission, what its goals should be, and what plans and policies will be needed to carry out those goals. So it really starts at the top. It starts with that mission statement. What is it we're going to do? What's the direction that we want to take our organization? From that, we can then develop the various goals that we need, and we can develop the various plans and policies to try to achieve those goals, which will then fulfill that mission. Now, one of the key words or key terms that you should have heard in that last slide was competitive advantage. And that's really what doing business is all about. It's trying to position our organization in the best position that we can relative to our peers. One of the gurus in this area is a person by the name of Michael Porter. And back in 1980, he developed a model, if you will, that describes competitive advantage. And this is referred to as Porter's competitive forces model, or 5 forces models. And it basically looks at several different dimensions, if you will, regarding competition. For example, the threat of new entrants, so other organizations that might join the industry that we might have to compete against. Supplier power, consumer power. So there's a variety of different potential competitive forces that could impact us. We've got a threat of substitute products. In other words, if we sell cars, a potential threat might be motorcycles, buses, bicycles. Those are potential threats to the transportation industry. Now, obviously, there are niches, so it may not be the best example, but it could be an example for some customers. And then there's rivalry among existing firms as well. So those are Porter's 5 forces. As far as the impact of the internet, how in 1980 most people weren't thinking about the internet and e-commerce and e-strategy and things like that. But Porter's 5 forces model is still relevant. When you start to think about the threat of new entrants, the internet's ideal for something like that, because now all of a sudden, instead of you're a mom and pop store, instead of competing against the person across the street, you're potentially competing against everyone on the planet, anybody that can throw up a website. So it certainly impacts our competitive advantage. The bargaining power of customers. Certainly customers have a lot more information today because of the internet. So Michael Porter's 5 forces model is just as relevant today, if not more so, than it was when it was originally developed. Exhibit 12.1 illustrates what Porter's 5 forces model might look at depending on how you want to conceptualize it. So you see us located there in the middle within an industry. There's our company, and within our industry certainly we're going to have competing companies, so we share that space with competing firms. Outside or external to our organization and external to our industry, we have the threat of new entrants. Some other company may consider entering into our particular industry. We've got supplier power, bargaining power of suppliers. If there are a lot of suppliers tend to not have a lot of power. But if there's only a few, a lot of times they control the goods and the goods, and if they don't want to sell, it makes it hard for you to buy. So they have a lot of power over you. There's the buying power or bargaining power of buyers and the distribution channels, so your customers. That if there's a lot of customers, the customers don't have a lot of power. If the customers have lots of information, the customers have more power. It's a relationship that we have with that particular group. And then there's the threat of substitute products and services. How closely are what we are offering, how closely is that related to other potential products? The example I gave on the last slide was in the transportation industry. Certainly there's other examples as well. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States, once said that the plan is nothing, planning is everything. And that's really kind of the impetus behind this slide when we're talking about strategic planning for IT and e-commerce. When we're talking about the strategic information systems planning, it's a process for developing a strategy and plans for aligning information systems, including e-commerce applications, with the organization's business strategy. The planning is what's really important when it comes to this, because the planning forces an organization to step back and assess itself, assess what its strengths are, assess what its weaknesses are, its threats, its opportunities, to take a look at its competitive environment using tools such as Porter's Five Forces that we just got through talking about. So it's the planning process that's extremely important, and some people refer to this as a strategic information systems planning process. And that process consists basically of 4 steps, or it can be broken down into 4 steps. The first is strategy initiation, the initial phase of strategic planning in which the organization examines itself and its environment. So the organization is looking internally and externally. It's looking at itself internally to identify what it's doing well and where it can improve. It's looking at its environment to see where the threats are potentially coming from and what some of the opportunities might be. Market opportunities that they might be able to capitalize on. Then you've got strategy formulation, the development of strategies to exploit opportunities and manage threats in the business environment in light of corporate strengths and weaknesses. So we take that information that we learned in strategy initiation and we start to think about how can we exploit our opportunities, how can we take advantage of those, how can we shore up some of our weaknesses. And that's the point behind strategy formulation. Once we've formulated that plan, we need to go ahead and implement it. Strategy implementation is the development of detailed short-term plans for carrying out the projects agreed on in strategy formulation. So we're going to actually apply what we came up with in the formulation stage. Lastly, we need to close the loop, and that's what's behind strategy assessment, the continuous evaluation of progress toward the organization's strategic goals, resulting in corrective action and, if necessary, strategy reformulation. In other words, we need to assess how effective we're being with our goal or with our strategy. Is it working or is it not working? Do we need to make modifications? Do we need to scrap it and start over again and reformulate another plan? And that's what strategy assessment is all about. It's closing that loop. Exhibit 12.5 illustrates the strategic planning process graphically and kind of shows you that circular relationship between the various steps. The idea being that you close the loop, that when you close the loop, that it's a never-ending process, that you're now back to a new point in time, a point in the future, where you need to reformulate, reassess, and identify again what your strengths and weaknesses are, because we operate in a dynamic environment. We're never really done with planning and implementing our strategies and making adjustments. It's a continuous process. So that's why we see this circular relationship between the various steps. There are a variety of tools that are used to work on or develop our strategic planning process. And one of those includes the idea, the concept of a strategy map, which is a graphical representation of the strategy of an organization. It helps to illustrate how an organization plans to achieve its mission and vision by means of a linked chain of continuous improvements. Basically what it's going to do is going to tie together 4 basic organizational objectives, looking at our financial objectives, our internal objectives, external objectives, and our learning and growth of the company objectives. And it helps to display the cause and effect relationships among these objectives. A strategy map begins at the top with a statement of the mission and vision of the company, or a focus area within the company. This is followed by the company's financial objective and continues down to the bottom of the hierarchy. Each objective that appears in a strategy map has an associated measure, target, and initiative. Overall strategy maps represent a hypothetical model of a business or one of the focus areas of the business. Another tool is a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is a methodology that surveys the opportunities and threats in the external environment and relates them to the organization's internal strengths and weaknesses. Another tool is the competitor analysis grid, which is basically just a table with the company's most significant competitors entered in columns across the top and key factors for comparison entered in the various rows. Some of the factors might include things like mission statements, strategic partners, sources of competitive advantage like cost leadership or global reach, as well as customer relationship strategies and financial resources. Another tool is scenario planning, which offers an alternative to traditional planning approaches that rely on straight line projection of current methods. Basically, the idea behind this is that when low probability events occur, they're obviously very hard to anticipate, and the results of those events is hard to anticipate. And this approach basically allows you to essentially take on role playing and game playing to try to determine what the likely events are to be when such events do happen to occur. Another approach to use when it comes to strategic planning is the balanced scorecard approach, which is a tool that assesses organizational progress towards strategic goals by measuring performance in a number of different areas. This is an alternative to traditionally very financially focused assessments that seeks a more balanced approach by measuring organizational performance in several key areas, including finance, customer assessments, internal business processes, and learning and growth. You may recognize these from our discussion earlier. The results of all this strategic planning inevitably end up with a business case or a business plan resulting out of all of that. A business plan is a written document that identifies the company's goals and outlines how the company intends to achieve the goals and at what cost. A business case is a little bit more focused. It really refers to it's really kind of a business plan for a new initiative or a large new project inside an existing organization. So it tends to be a smaller in scope, but very similar in terms of the way it looks and the way it reads. Exhibit 12.6 tries to illustrate or show you the role of the internet in terms of strategy. Strategy setting begins with the business strategy, determining an organization's vision, its mission statement, its overall goals. Then the information system strategy is set primarily by determining what information and associated information systems are going to be required to carry out that business strategy. In other words, they operate together, they support each other. The information and communication technology strategy is decided based on how to deliver the information and information systems via technology. An e-commerce strategy is a derivative of both the IS strategy and the ICT strategy. Now, the internet impacts all levels of organizational strategy setting. As you can see from the diagram, it impacts all four of these. Business strategists need to consider the internet's role in creating or innovating products, in product and service delivery, in supplier and customer relationships, and its impact on competition in the marketplace. The internet needs to be viewed as a complement to traditional ways of competing, not as a source of competitive advantage in and of itself, according to Porter. IS strategists need to consider the internet as a tool for collecting information and distributing it to where it is required. ICT planners need to plan the integration of the internet-based technologies into existing ICT infrastructure. One of the interesting things in my mind about e-commerce is that despite the complexities, and in many ways, e-commerce is no different than traditional business. Yet at the same time, some of the problems that e-commerce faces are almost prescriptive. We can identify them. We tend to see the same types of problems over and over again. Representative issues in e-commerce strategy initiation include things like first mover advantage. The advantage of being first include an opportunity to make a first and lasting impression on customers, to establish long-term or strong brand recognition, to lock in strategic partners, and to create switching costs for customers. A good example of this is Amazon.com, a very recognizable name in the B2C market. In some cases, though, being the first mover can have some disadvantages, such as the risk of being first mover include the high cost of pioneering e-commerce initiatives, making mistakes, the chance that a second wave of competitors will eliminate the first mover's lead through lower costs and innovation, and the risk that the move will be too early. Simply, customers won't adopt. There's also the issue of managing channel conflict. Channel conflict may arise when an existing company adds an online distribution channel. I believe it was Levi Jeans ran into this issue when they initially moved to the online environment, that they were basically stealing sales from their traditional sales channel, which upset them greatly, obviously, their various retailers. And so they had to retreat from selling jeans online to a different strategy where they were simply providing information about where to buy their jeans, the different product offerings and things like that online, but not actually providing any sales online. This leads to the issue of disintermediation. We've talked about this before, and I won't go into any more detail on that at this point. There's also separating online and offline operations. Separating a company's online operations into a new company makes sense when the volume of anticipated e-business is large, a new business model needs to be developed apart from the constraints of the current operations, the subsidiary can be created without dependence on the current operations and legacy systems, and the online company is given the freedom to form new alliances, attract new talent, and set its own prices and raise additional funding. So it doesn't always make sense to separate your online and offline businesses. In some cases you want to, in some cases you don't want to. And this ties in tightly with the very next point of brand independence. A company faces a similar decision when deciding whether to create a separate brand for its online offerings. Generally, companies with strong, mature, international brands will want to retain and promote those brands online. The book gives the example of Google, where they tie in the Google name into a variety of different product offerings because Google has a strong brand recognition, positive recognition. However, existing firms with a weak brand or brand that does not reflect the intent of the online effort may decide to create a new brand. So assuming we've developed a strong organizational strategy or company strategy, and that part of that includes some sort of an e-commerce component, an online component, which presumably in today's age certainly would, there are certain things that we certainly have to focus on and make sure that we're aware of some very specific important issues when planning a successful e-commerce strategy that includes social media. This includes developing an overall e-commerce strategy with clearly defined business goals. In other words, we have to have a target. If we don't have a target, we really don't know that anything that we're developing is moving in the right direction. We need to be able to effectively market to existing customers. We need to be able to sell globally as well as locally. We need to be able to develop a consistent online and offline brand strategy. We need to be able to create business profiles and allow customers to post reviews by leveraging free resources available to merchants on sites such as Yahoo, Bing, Google Places, Facebook, Twitter, YellowPages.com, etc. We also need to be able to create surveys and two-way communication mechanisms to solicit feedback from customers. The idea is that the Web 2.0 is a very dynamic environment and allows two-way communication and allows us to leverage our customer experiences for potential future sales of both those customers as well as other customers. And so it's a very powerful area of e-commerce. So which e-commerce investments should we make? In other words, as an organization, we have a lot of opportunities, potential e-commerce initiatives that we can potentially undertake, but not all of them are going to give us the same payback or the level or degree of payback that we might be interested in. So we have to have some sort of way to evaluate those various opportunities or those various projects. A lot of times we can use cost benefit and risk analysis to identify which projects are going to give us the most bang for our buck, if you will. More productive strategy selection approaches can be used when compelling internal or external forces drive the strategy selection process. A problem-driven strategy is best when the organization has a specific problem that an e-commerce application can solve. A technology-driven strategy occurs when a company owns technology that needs to be used. A market-driven strategy can occur when a company waits to see what the competitors in the industry do. A late mover strategy can be effective when the company can use its brand, technology, superior customer service, or innovative products and strategies to overcome any lost first mover advantage. For the most part, it's best to use a systematic methodology that determines which initiatives to pursue and when, and this is oftentimes referred to as the portfolio mix. For years, companies have tried to figure out what's the most appropriate mix. What are the types of projects that they need to include in their application portfolio, if you will. A lot of times, you're trying to balance the number of long-term, high-risk projects that you might take on against the shorter-term existing profit-making opportunities that you have. And figuring out where the balance is the difficulty that you're tasked with. As far as a couple of different models for this, there's ones referred to as the BCG model, the Boston Consulting Group model. It's a growth share matrix with its star, cash cow, wild card, and dog opportunities. It was developed back in the 70s. It has a matrix that has two dimensions: market growth rate, which can be either low or high, and relative market share, which also can be either low or high. So it's a 2x2 matrix, and so you end up with four cells: star, which represents high growth and high share, market share; cash cows, which represent high market share but low growth; question marks, which have high growth but low market share; and dogs, which are low growth and low market share. The corporation would then categorize its business units or projects as stars, cash cows, question marks, or dogs, and allocate budgets accordingly, moving money from cash cows to stars and to question marks that had higher market growth rates and hence higher upside potential. An adapted approach to that is the Internet Portfolio Map. Instead of evaluating market potential and market share, the Internet Portfolio Map is based on company fit and project viability, both of which can be either low or high. Various criteria, including market value potential, time to positive cash flow, time to implementation, and funding requirements, can be used to assess viability. Graphically, the Internet Portfolio Map looks something like this, and it's an easy way for upper management to be able to interpret and identify projects that are going to provide the most bang for the buck. And as a result, they can start to determine which projects they want to fund and which ones they want to put on the back burner and which ones they want to eliminate altogether. There's risk in virtually every business venture, and I say virtually, you can scrap the word virtually and say in every business venture risk exists. Certainly for those that have been around long enough and are familiar with e-commerce and remember the early 2000s, late 1990s, e-commerce obviously has a significant amount of risk. So in that sense, it's no different than traditional business. As far as a definition of e-commerce risk, the likelihood that a negative outcome will occur in the course of developing and operating an electronic commerce strategy. So this could stem from the business side of things, that we simply did not think through our business plan enough. to the operational side of we're running a risk by simply putting credit card numbers online and selling products and our day-to-day business. Maybe natural disasters, that we have a data center that's located in an area that has hurricanes or tornadoes that frequent the area. So risk really comes from all over the place: business risk, natural disaster risk, etc. Security issues to consider during strategy formulation include things like fraudulent and malicious acts committed by either employees or third parties against the company's computer systems, computer virus attacks that hinder or even close down the company's operations, accidental alterations to or destruction of electronic information and records, as well as a variety of others that are discussed in the book on page 602. Pricing strategies and managing conflict between offline and online businesses are typical issues that you see when you try to formulate e-commerce strategies. As far as managing conflict between offline and online businesses, think about an organization that sells through multiple channels and perhaps has a sales force that operates on commission. Obviously, you're going to have issues when a customer goes in to make a purchase face to face, and rather than actually making the purchase, they simply are obtaining or retrieving information. They take that information back to actually make the purchase online. This starts to lead to problems with your sales force and disgruntlement, if you will. So that's an issue that an organization really has to have a good handle on before they decide to take this approach. The book gives the example of Sears that you may want to read through. As far as pricing strategies, there's really a couple of traditional approaches for determining price of a good or service. Those two are cost plus as well as competitor models. Cost plus basically just means you're going to add up all the costs involved, such as material, labor, rent, overhead, all that together, and then add some sort of a percentage as your markup. The competitor model is the lazy man's model, if you will. It determines the price based on what your competitors are charging for similar products in the marketplace. Pricing products and services for online sales changes some of those pricing strategies, though, really in some pretty subtle ways, yet they're important ways. For example, price comparisons become easier. And why is that important? Well, it gives a lot more power to the buyer. In a traditional sales environment, the seller tends to have more information. As a result, they tend to have more power, so they can command a higher price. When the buyer all of a sudden has more information, now they're able to make comparisons more easily. They're able to identify other retailers that are charging a lower price, that perhaps offer a better service, things of that nature. So as a result, they end up with more power, and this places downward pressure on the prices. As far as buyers sometimes set the price, there are different models out there. For example, Priceline.com, certain reverse auctions, where instead of the seller setting the price, the buyer sets the price. And so that obviously affects our pricing strategy as well. There's online and offline goods that are priced differently. So again, think about retailers that operate both in the virtual world or e-commerce world, and those that operate at the same time also operate in the physical world. That these companies have a conflict, if you will. Are they going to charge the same price for the same good or service in both environments or not? Obviously, the cost structures are different in each of these environments. That's not to say that the e-commerce area that the cost structures are cheaper or are less, because they may not be. The investment in the e-commerce side of things is very expensive. But the cost structures are definitely different. And so this creates depending on our pricing strategy, a necessary examination of those cost structures and how that's going to affect our prices. And we have to relate that to whether or not how that's going to affect our competitive advantage when we're selling something to customers at the same price or a different price. Differentiated pricing can be used as a pricing strategy, though. In other words, some goods we're able to sell the same good to different customers at a different price depending on certain characteristics of of what we're selling and of potential buyers. For example, think about the airline industry that's selling spots or seats on a plane. If you purchase a seat far in advance, a lot of times you're able to get that price down. As that plane starts to fill up, the price goes up and up and up for that seat. Ultimately, till it gets to the point very close to the cutoff time to make the purchase, at which point the price actually drops if the plane is not full, because the airline wants to make sure that plane is full. They don't make any money when the seat's empty. Related to this is a concept of versioning, selling the same good but with different selection and delivery characteristics. The book gives the example of, for example, market prices, stock prices, that some people are willing to pay more for real-time prices instead of some sort of a delayed pricing. As with all forms of differentiated pricing, versioning information is based on the fact that some buyers are willing to pay more to retrieve or receive some additional advantage. Okay, so we've developed our strategy. We've identified the appropriate portfolio that we want as an organization and determined which e-commerce strategies or e-commerce projects that we want to focus on for the current cycle. How do we actually go through the process of implementation? Well, first off, we need to start off with some sort of a champion. We need to identify a project champion. A champion is a person who ensures that the e-commerce project gets the time, attention, and resources required and defends the project from detractors at all times. What are some of those resources? Well, they include personnel, people that understand technology, that understand the business side of things, and can marry those two together. Includes money. In other words, if we've got programmers that we need to pay, we've got to have funding. If we don't have funding, our project's dead. And that's the role of the champion, is to be able to identify what resources are needed and make sure that project gets those resources. In a lot of cases, we'll want to start with some sort of a pilot project, a smaller, scaled down project that's going to allow us to, number one, develop a proof of concept and prove that it works, but also work out some of the bugs and hopefully to start to gain attention from the rest of the organization and support from the rest of the organization as they see the pilot project implemented and working effectively. We've got to allocate resources required for the e-commerce project. This really depends on the information requirements and the capabilities of each project. For example, some resources are going to include software, computers, warehouse capacity, staff, etc. Lastly, we're going to need to manage that project, and this is really a key area. We've got a champion who's really just arguing on behalf of the project itself to keep the organization on track, to keep the organization focused, to keep the support there. The project manager is the one that's actually going to be handling the day-to-day operations of making sure that all the pieces are coming together and done in the proper order, completed on time, and completed on budget. And the project manager's job may be easier or more difficult depending on some of the decisions that are made in terms of implementation as they relate to build, buying, or renting e-commerce elements. If your organization is large enough and has the skill set and the need for a very customized application, you may decide to build it yourself, and as a result the project manager is going to have a pretty big task on their hands. They may choose to purchase something off the shelf, an existing application that serves most, if not all, of their needs. If it serves all their needs, their task is going to be greatly simplified. If it requires some customization, it perhaps will require a little bit more work, but not to the extent of building an application entirely. And then you have the option to really simply purchase a software as a service, if you will, and rent e-commerce elements from somebody that's what they specialize in. You also have the idea of outsourcing. If you're a small organization, you may not have the choice of building your own application. You may yet you still may require some sort of a specialized product, some customization, or to build a good or software package from the ground up. And if you don't have that expertise, you've got to get it from somewhere. So you may end up outsourcing your project. Outsourcing is the use of an external vendor to provide all or part of the products and services that could be provided internally. We talked about outsourcing versus offshoring in a previous chapter, so I'm not going to go over it at this point. Just realize that it is an option. It's always an option that you really have to consider as an organization. Having said that, strategically as an organization, you have to keep in mind whether or not a particular project is a core competency or not. If it is a core competency, then it's not something that you should be looking to outsource. That's something you really should consider keeping in-house as much as possible. If, however, it's not something that's part of your core business, it's not something that you're particularly good at, that's a prime target or prime project for outsourcing. When we consider implementing a new e-commerce system, we have to start to think about how that's going to affect our existing processes within our organization. There's a couple of terms that get kicked around a lot, especially in the management field of business process reengineering and business process management. Business process reengineering is a methodology for conducting a comprehensive redesign of an enterprise's processes. In other words, it's looking at the existing processes and identifying or realizing that these processes have been used for some amount of time, perhaps for several years, perhaps decades, and recognizing that technology has changed over time, and as a result, some of those processes may no longer be necessary. They may no longer be being done as efficiently as they otherwise could be. And so by reevaluating those processes, we have the opportunity to become more efficient. And that's the idea behind business process reengineering. Business process management is a method for business restructuring that combines workflow systems and redesign methods. It covers three process categories: people to people, systems to systems, and systems to people interactions. So in a sense, it's related to business process reengineering, but we're starting to think about how people and how technology integrate with each other and the processes that facilitate that interaction. Once we've formulated our e-commerce plan and implemented it and identified how it's going to impact our various business processes and done all of that, we need to close the loop. We need to determine whether or not we've been successful, and if we were successful, great. If we weren't successful, what do we need to change in order to be successful in the future? But to be able to make that determination, we need to have some way of objectively measuring whether or not we have indeed met our objectives. So the objectives of assessment are to measure the extent to which e-commerce strategy and ensuing projects are delivering what they're supposed to deliver. If they're not delivering, apply corrective actions to ensure that the projects are able to meet their objectives. Also need to be able to determine if the e-commerce strategy and projects are still viable in the current environment. In other words, if they're continuing to head in the wrong direction, we don't need to continue to pour good money after bad. We cancel those projects. We need to be able to reassess the initial strategy in order to learn from mistakes and improve future planning. And we need to be able to identify failing projects as soon as possible and determine why they failed to avoid the same problems in subsequent projects. Part of this process for determining how effective our e-commerce projects are is the establishment of what's known as key performance indicators. It's a measure that we're measure. The idea is that these are the proper performance indicators that we need to be measuring. A KPI is a quantifiable measurement agreed to beforehand, and that's a key. You don't want no revisionist history here. You identify these metrics beforehand, and they reflect the critical success factors of a company, a department, or a project. So some example KPIs might be attracting new customers or clients to your website, maybe improving online marketing effectiveness, or retaining existing customers and clients. Once we've established our key performance indicators, we need to identify the specific metrics or measurable standard against which actual performance is compared. So some examples of this might be the time to actually execute a transaction. So this is something we can actually execute when a customer visits a website, and how long from that initial visit to their ultimate purchase. All of that can be documented, and so it's measurable. The profit per customer. We have we identify our various customers. We identify the goods that they're buying, and the cost of those goods and the relative markup, so we can determine, it's very measurable, the profit per customer that we can determine. Things like that. Those are some examples of some of the metrics that we might be able to use. Another way of assessing project performance is through the use of corporate performance management or business performance management. Advanced performance measuring and analysis approaches that embraces planning and strategies, and it uses several different approaches, such as balanced scorecards, various metrics, aligning strategies and actions, and there's a whole wealth of literature, academic literature, that looks at the importance of aligning strategies to actual implementations and various other actions that an organization goes through. Yet another approach is web analytics, the analysis of clickstream data to understand visitor behavior on a website. The idea is we want to know where visitors are coming from, what pages they look at, and how long they're on various pages, and how they interact with some of the site's information. One of the benefits of e-commerce is that it really opens up the entire global environment to become our market. But this additional market space, if you will, creates a lot of additional challenges that we don't really have if we narrow our focus down to our domestic market, or even smaller. And so these represent a variety of different barriers to global e-commerce. The first barrier that the book discusses is the idea of cultural differences. That cultural attributes determine how people interact with companies, agencies, and with each other based on social norms, local standards, religious beliefs, and language. Think about things like spelling, information formatting, graphics and icons, measurement standards, use of color, protection of intellectual property, time standards, styles of navigation, and information density on home pages. These are all different depending on where we might be located. For example, a lot of Asian countries have very dense home pages. They have a lot of information on the home page, and they can consume all that information. Versus Western home pages, specifically the United States, we tend to have less dense home pages, less information on the home page, more of a value of white space, if you will. Measurement standards, different places use different standards for measurement. Colors impact are seen differently from one culture to another, etc., etc. There's also the issue of language translation. Keep in mind, the internet at one point was very much so dominated by the English-speaking world. That's no longer the case, and there's a very large Chinese market that obviously their first language is not English. And studies show that people are more likely to purchase from websites that are tailored to their particular language. As far as legal issues, keep in mind when you're operating on a global in a global environment, now all of a sudden you have to deal with different legal systems, where something may be legal in one environment but not in another. For example, the sale of World War II memorabilia is highly regulated in some countries and not at all in other countries. As far as geographic issues and localization, think about shipping goods and services across international borders. This is kind of related to the legal issue, but there's a little bit of a different nuance here. Think about the transportation infrastructure. Just going from here to, say, Mexico, the highway system is significantly different in Mexico than it is here. The telecommunications infrastructure is significantly different here in the United States than it is in Mexico. So there are certainly some geographic issues. And localization is simply referring to the idea that a lot of companies use different colors, different names, different sizes and packaging for products that are in different markets. The reason being that the look and feel and words used to market a product have different meanings in different cultures, and sometimes that they transition into a different culture quite easily and quite well, and in other cases they don't. As far as economic issues, this is again similar to and in some ways related to the concept of geographic issues and legal issues, but again with a little bit of a different spin or a different nuance. The idea that there are government tariffs, various customs, and taxation schemes that are in place that we have to consider when we're operating in a global environment that are less likely to be an issue if we were simply operating domestically. How do we overcome some of those barriers? Well, there's a variety of different things that we can do. We can be strategic, for example. In other words, we can identify a starting point and lay out a globalization strategy. Remember, the web globalization is a business building process. In other words, it's not going to happen overnight, so we need to be strategic about the approach that we take. Consider what languages and countries it makes sense for the company to target and how the company will support the site for each target audience. Speaking of audiences, know your audience. Carefully consider the target audience. Be fully informed of the cultural preferences and legal issues that matter to customers in a particular part of the world. Localize. As much as practical and necessary, offer websites in national languages and offer different sites in different countries. For example, Yahoo Japan is at yahoo.co.jp. Price products in local currencies and base terms, conditions, and business practices on local laws and cultural practices. Make sure that it's familiar to the people in that target group. Think globally, act consistently. An international company with country websites managed by local offices must make sure that areas such as brand management, pricing, corporate information, and content management are consistent with company strategy. Value the human touch. Trust the translation of the website content only to human translators, not machine translation programs. Involve language and technical editors in the quality assurance process. One slight mistranslation or one out-of-place graphic can turn off customers forever. Clarify, document, and explain. Pricing, privacy policies, shipping restrictions, contact information, and business practices should be well documented and located on the website and visible to the customer. To help protect against foreign litigation, identify the company's location and the jurisdiction for all contract or sales dispute. And finally, offer services that reduce barriers. It's not feasible to offer prices and payments in all currencies, so link to a currency exchange service for the customer's convenience. In B2B e-commerce, be prepared to integrate e-commerce transaction, the e-commerce transaction with the accounting and finance internal information systems of the buyer. SMEs, or small and medium-sized enterprises, are particularly interesting when it comes to e-commerce. Reason being that e-commerce provides an opportunity for SMEs to be competitive with their larger counterparts. Nevertheless, SMEs are still finding it difficult to formulate or implement an e-commerce strategy, mainly because of the inability to handle large volumes of business. Limited use of e-commerce by suppliers. Maybe they lack knowledge of IT experience. They may have limited awareness associated with the opportunities and risks. As a result, many SMEs create static websites that are not used to market or expand their business and do not use e-commerce to interactively sell their products or services. Again, what's the frustrating thing about that is that the nature of e-commerce helps to lower the barriers to entry, and it's a relatively inexpensive way of reaching a large number of buyers and sellers who can more easily search for and compare prices and negotiate a purchase. As a result, there's really only a small percentage of them that really conduct a significant amount of their business globally. What that really means, though, is there's a lot of potential there for SMEs to really develop their businesses online. Resources to support SMEs. A lot of times SME owners lack strategic management skills, and consequently they're not necessarily always aware of some of the changes in the business environment with respect to emerging technologies. And so there's a variety of support options that are potentially out there. A number of government agencies devoted to helping SMEs become more aware of and able to participate in e-commerce. There are varieties that have realized that there are opportunities represented by thousands of businesses trying to go online, and a lot of them have set up a variety of different service centers that typically offer a combination of free information and fee-based support. One particularly powerful tool that SMEs have at their disposal is the use of social media and social networks to be able to promote their businesses and promote their opportunities that they have. Exhibit 12.3 outlines 10 steps to a successful social media strategy. It includes understanding what social media is and the benefits of using it, identifying the audience you want to reach, identifying the resources you currently have available, identify the most appropriate technologies to use, and so on. The managerial issues identified in this chapter start with identifying the strategic value of e-commerce to the organization. In other words, it's important for management to understand how e-commerce can improve marketing and promotions, customer service and sales, and the supply chain and procurement process. As far as relating the e-commerce activities with business objective metrics, companies must first choose objectives and design appropriate metrics to measure the goals of actual achievement. Should the e-commerce activities be spun off as a separate company? That's really up to the specific situation. Sometimes it's useful in eliminating conflicts of prices and strategies. Sometimes it's best to have separate prices. Again, it really depends on the specific business that you're operating in and the channels that you're using. How should the e-business scope evolve? As Amazon.com experienced, the company may handle a certain item in the beginning stage, but the number of items will expand to include many kinds. As the scope of the items expands, the order fulfillment plan has to evolve accordingly, considering the alliance strategy with partners who have strong sourcing capabilities. What are the benefits and risks of e-commerce? Strategic advantage has to be carefully weighed against potential risks. Identifying critical success factors for e-commerce and doing a cost-benefit analysis is an important step in developing an e-commerce strategy. Why do we need an e-commerce planning process? A strategic plan is both a document and a process. I mentioned the quote earlier from Dwight D. Eisenhower that plans don't mean anything. It's the planning that's particularly important. And that's what we're talking about. It's the process of identifying our strengths and our weaknesses so we can kind of direct the organization in the direction that it needs to be going. How can e-commerce go global? Going global with e-commerce is a very appealing proposition for companies of all sizes, but it may be difficult to do, especially on a large scale, or for SMEs that lack the necessary resources. As a result, there's a variety of different opportunities that SMEs in particular can take advantage of that they need to become more aware of. How do you manage the e-commerce project? Forming an effective team is critical for e-commerce project success. The team's leadership, the balance between technical and business staff, getting the best staff representation on the team, and having a project champion are essential for success. So you should now be able to explain the strategic planning process and why it's important. You should understand what a business plan is and what a business case is. You should understand the e-commerce strategic process. You should understand the e-commerce strategy initiation and formulation steps, or stages. You should understand the e-strategy implementation and assessment stages. You should understand some of the global e-commerce issues. And you should understand SME or small and medium-sized businesses in e-commerce. This concludes Chapter 12, E-commerce Strategy, Globalization, and SMEs. Thank you.